Session 3 and 4 taught by Dr. Reams and Black in 1977. This is tape 14 side A.
Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Session, class 3 and 4. Dr. Reams opened the session with a devotion. Dr. Black takes over by discussing high chlorhydria, if that's the way to pronounce the word. Tape number 14-6-27/1/77.
It's wonderful to be in the service of the Lord. Some of you have heard this message that I'm giving you this morning, and some of you have not heard it, but it will not do any harm to hear it again. And it begins in the first chapter of Genesis in verse 1.
It's not on.
Thank you for helping me. Some of you have heard this message and some of you have not heard it. And anyway, it will not do any harm to hear it again. It begins in the first chapter of Genesis, verse 1. It says this: in the beginning, God. If you want to know when the beginning was, turn to the book of Revelation, chapter 1. And it says, I am Alpha and Omega. I am the beginning and the end. So then the next word says, in the beginning God created. Then when you use that word created, then he's limiting this book to a dispensation in which we find ourselves. Then it says the heavens and the earth. Then it tells us that he made a garden and put man in it. And Adam was the largest farmer that ever farmed the earth. It covered all of North Africa down to the Congo. You'll find this in the second chapter of Genesis. All of Arabia, all of Babylon, Israel, Assyria, Syria, what is today Turkey, Greece, and probably around to Rome. And probably the eastern end of the Mediterranean, because under that sea they have found cities under the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. So what I'm telling you, Adam had a very large garden to look after. And Adam had an anionic body. And so many people think that God created Adam and Eve in the garden naked, and they were not naked. They were clothed in light. It tells you that in the book of Psalms. In the book of Revelation it says, when we are like him, we shall shine like the sun. With the glory of God, it shall shine like the sun. The very radiance of our body temperatures will be our raiment. Also, Adam and Eve was created in God's own image. And it says that God is a flaming fire. Even Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire. In other words, we're learning here something about what our bodies will be like when we are in the heavens. And then it's even greater than we can imagine. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before the fall did not have any sweat or tears or death, or they didn't have bowel movements, or they didn't have to urinate like we do. Entirely a different situation. But they were told to go and replenish the earth. It says replenish. In other words, it indicates that this earth had been inhabited before. Go and replenish the earth. I believe that's it's in the first chapter of Genesis. Then we are told that Satan rebelled against the angels. He was, Lucifer at least, was the archangel of all archangels. He was the highest angel, and he rebelled against God, and he was cast down to earth. He was going to prove then that his laws were more perfect than God's law. He made his own laws, and then the first thing when the sun went out, he didn't pay his gas bill, I guess. The sun refused to shine, and then the earth turned, and the waters then got mixed up with the land, and he had one great big mud pie, big as the earth. If the earth should stop rotating, the waters would cover the land equal depth all over because the gravity would be equal all over. But the spinning of the earth separates the waters from the dry land. And there's so much to tell you about this creation that God made, but we can only hit the high points this morning. Then something happened. There was a tree in the midst of the garden, and it is believed that that tree was on about the present site of where Jerusalem is today. And the anionic bodies are not limited by time or space. They can move great distance instantaneously. For instance, if you wanted to, this morning you had an anionic body and you wanted to make a call from here to London, England, and get an answer from someone, you could just go over there and get it and be back quick, and you could get a telephone call through. So anionic bodies are not limited by time or space. They can move great distances instantaneously. And you will find some stories in the Bible of miracles. This is a miracle. You're in a miracle world because you will be traveling at even a greater speed than light when the earth is made new. It says the heavens and the earth shall pass away. It's speaking about this dispensation, this heaven that we're in here, or this earth. There's 7 heavens, but the one heaven is the atmosphere between us and the Van Allen belt. And this gives us a little idea about how great God is. When I was just a small boy, 5 years old, I think it was probably then that my life work began. Something happened there that leads me to believe that God had chosen me to do something for him. I didn't know it then, but I find out later that was the beginning of an idea that I traced, and I will tell you about it. We had a circuit rider minister out in a country church that came around once a month, and he preached this particular Sunday on the resurrection of the dead, Christ's second coming. And he said when Christ comes, that the people were going to get up out of the graves and go to meet him in the air and would go to heaven. It's the first sermon I ever remember at all. But I remember that sermon very well that he preached. But he went home with my parents that day, and while they were eating dinner, I said to this minister, his name was Brother Smith, I said to him, "Brother Smith, I don't believe what you said in your sermon today." Of course, I was 5 years old, and a child speaks very plainly. I can still remember seeing my mother and father's face cloud up as if to say, "What have I hatched here?" And they didn't say anything, but the minister then, he said, "Son, what did I say that you did not understand?" I said, "Well, you said that when Jesus comes," and I quote exactly, "that the graves would be opened and the dead people would get up and be alive and go to meet him in the air. And don't you know when something dies it goes to dust and you can't put it together again?" You know, I'd seen animals die and go to dust and things of that nature. Reasoning taught me that the same thing would happen to people. I didn't know anything about dust thou art, to dust shalt thou return. I knew nothing about that. But it was just child logic, child thinking. He said, "Who put you together to start with?" I said, "Nobody. The doctor brought me." In other words, and a child's understanding is what I was told. And he said, "Well, you're only a child now, but when you're a man, you'll understand these things." Well, you know, the older I got, the more I did not understand them, especially when I got into high school and college and began to study about the martyrs burned at the stake and the smoke drifting up and out over the ocean and the rain bringing the carbons down into the ocean and being eaten by the fish and the ashes scattered to the four winds of the earth, the more confused I became. And I didn't understand. I was confused. I was in a conflict. In other words, I was trying to bring God down to my size, and God don't let that happen. He doesn't permit us to bring him down to his size. But one day later, I was in the lab working when two police officers brought in some ashes of a building that was burned. This was after I was a grown man and in practice. And he said, "Can you tell us whether this was an animal in the building or a person in the building?" So the undertaker had a crematory, and I borrowed ashes from him, tested the ashes, and returned them all. But I found at that time in 1934, I learned the frequency upon which human beings live, which verified the perfection of the formula that God had given me in 1931. Then I learned that the frequency upon which people live, and no two have the same numbers down to the millimicronage, but we all have the same frequency according to sex. But the micronage is different, the millimicronage is different, and the millimillimicronage is different. I also learned that there was 3 people in these ashes and not just one. That there was 1 male and 2 females, but I couldn't tell anything about their age. And there had been a mother and her 2 children that had been disappeared with this fire, and they had not been located since. So what I was trying to tell you, this was the beginning that God has evidently chosen for this understanding and this work that is just now blossoming out and spreading over the world. Also, when Eve ate of the fruit of the tree, she disobeyed God just one time. Just once she disobeyed God. And then she went and told Adam, and I don't believe that that fruit was sex, because God said go and replenish the earth. And God would not make a law and in conflict with himself. That wouldn't be God. However, you have a right to your opinion, and I have no argument with you if that's what you want to believe. But what I'm saying, I don't believe that God is a God of conflict. And if he said go and replenish the earth, he had some way of doing it without, before the fall and after the fall. But then Adam sinned, and Adam only made one mistake. Only one time did Adam sin. Do you know what his mistake was? He listened to his wife. That's correct. That's right. He had a choice to listen to his wife and die, or to listen to his wife and he thought probably be without her. I think I would have made the same decision. So I'm not blaming him, but I'm telling you something that happened. But he partaken of the fruit too, and then it says, and they knew they were naked, and they made leaves to cover their nakedness. In other words, the light went out. Their bodies changed from anionic bodies to cationic bodies. Then it says that God used a sword to drive them from the Garden of Eden. The sword was evidently oxygen. Oxygen is known as the element. They call it the sword of all elements, because everything that comes in contact with begins to come apart. But it's also necessary to put things together. But remember, you'll learn later of the laws that put things together. But now then, we're talking about taking things apart this morning. So the light went out, and they had the cationic bodies. Death began. Time began. Before the fall, before man began to breathe oxygen, there was no time. So time begins with oxygen. Death denotes that there's an end to something. Time denotes that there's an end to something. In the book of Revelation, it says, when the books are opened and so forth and so on, and time shall be no more. Time shall be no more. We'll be living in an age of rhythm, not time. You can live in an age of rhythm without living in the age of time. You can have rhythm without time, but you cannot have time without rhythm. Don't forget that rule. You may see it again on examination. So this then begins to bring about something. There was a change that Adam began to have the decay, bowel movements, urination, sweat, tears, death, illnesses, and many, many things began to happen. But there was no rain upon the earth until the flood for the first time. And during the flood, God gave the rainbow to show that the earth would never be destroyed by water anymore. But it will be destroyed by fire. But I'm going to show you something here, the most beautiful side of the entire scripture, I think. when you begin to understand it in its fullness. We come to the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were in a fiery furnace, and the fire was made many hundreds of times hotter. And the fourth person was seen walking in the fire all night. The next morning the king called for them. Out came the three, but the fourth one didn't come out. That night those men walked in the fire all night, without a hair scorched, clothing burned, or any ill effect. They were not even hot at all. Some angel, Gabriel, or the Lord himself, came down and turned their bodies into anionic bodies for that night, and it didn't even get an eyebrow burned. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that heaven is hotter than hell, because the temperature of an anionic body is 980 degrees centigrade, and sulfur burns at 720 degrees centigrade. So the saints can walk through hell and not even get hot, and not even need a fan. And Jesus, after he rose from the dead, had an anionic body. He spilt the last drop of blood that he had for the remission of our sins. And then he went down into the grave cationic, but he rose the third day anionic body. He could move great distances. He could go right through the wall. There's as much room for an anionic body to walk through a solid wall as there is for you to walk through a hangar door of an airplane garage, or whatever you call it, hangar. But the mysteries of God is so great that we cannot comprehend it, and all of the magnificence and greatness and the beauty of it. You often hear people discuss, did God create this universe in a day, or did he take 1,000 years? Well, if there was no time, then whatever was done instantly, because there was no yesterday or tomorrow. It's all now. This is a formula that can be expressed in mathematical terms. And so things that are equal to the same thing are equal to each other. So that is the rule that can be expressed in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different ways. There's not just one way to express it, there's many ways to express it. So this gives you something about the beauty of the creation. Now, when this earth was put together, and when the universe was put together, it was put together by the laws of God, which is the ionization. In other words, God is the creator of the ion and the cation, and from those things, everything that's made is made. And everything that exists is made out of anions and cations. And then, only 50 years ago, we thought that the atom was the smallest thing that there was. And then we find out that the atom was made out of something smaller, anions and cations. So then we begin to see how great God is. Whenever we begin to realize the greatness of God, we begin to realize how small we are. Also, Jesus, after he had risen from the dead on the Sea of Galilee, ate fish. Now, those fish didn't digest like you and I digest fish. The fish was digested by the heat energy. It went off as heat or electrical energy. And in our anionic bodies, we shall be known as we are known. We shall be young again. We shall be made whole again. And we shall be in the image of God as we were in the Garden of Eden. I'm going to tell you, fellows and folks and doctors and friends, heaven is cheap at any price. At any price. And it behooves us to give of our best to the Master. Give of your best to everyone, but don't let anyone hog your time or take too much of your time or delay you in this great job that God has given you for an assignment. And this message that you're learning today is the health message. It's the health message that is taught in the Bible. It is the most neglected part of the Bible. It is the part of the Bible that is not mentioned. It's rather a no-no to so many preachers. And therefore they've become history teachers instead of feeding the sheep. Jesus said on the Sea of Galilee the same day that he ate the fish, he said unto Peter, Peter, do you love me? And 3 times he asked the question. And of course, Peter, being rather excitable, finally said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Then he got the idea that he meant to feed the sheep, to feed them spiritually. Also, today we have too many history teachers in the pulpit and not enough shepherds to feed the sheep. So, I'm not speaking against them. History is a wonderful thing. But the people that go home hungry have stewed preacher for Sunday dinner. And the people that go home well fed are seeking them to walk in the steps of the Master. You know, it's the ministers of the earth, the pastor, the shepherd, the pastor, the shepherd of the flock, has one of the greatest responsibilities on earth. He is the highest authority on earth. There's no one's authority is any higher than his if he gets his orders from God. But if he gets it from the board of directors or the board of trustees or the board of deacons or elders, he gets what he deserves. So the thing that the pastor's duty is to lead the elders, the leaders of the church, is to lead them in the paths of righteousness, not to follow in after them. It's perfectly right for him to designate authority, but if he lets them lead him, the church is slowly dying by degrees. So what I'm saying to you today is to wake up and come out from among them and be a shepherd for God, even though it means that you go to jail, even though it means that you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, even though it means that whatever it means for you, that you're called a quack, or whatever it means it for you to follow God and to understand. This great message that you're learning today is the health message, and it's the message that's going to unite the saints of all denominations and prepare for the coming of the Lord. Also, you are at times going to have to realize that all your patients are going to die. But you can keep them healthier, happier, and longer, and more economically than anyone else. And there are going to be times when you need to console those that are bereaved. But the devil will tell you that when you're dead, you're going to be dead a long time. That's not so. That's a lie. The person that died in Adam's day or Abraham's day will not have been dead any longer than the person who dies just 1 hour before Jesus comes, because out there is no time. In other words, to be absent in body is to be present with the Lord. And there is no time out there. It's just like going to sleep at night, having a sound night's sleep, and the next thing you wake up and it's bright daylight. Time hasn't existed in there. You've been refreshed. You've been relaxed. The tension is gone. You've been out of the rat race for a little while. And you're at peace with yourself, providing you didn't eat too much supper, providing your calciums are up, and so forth, providing that when you're awake at night, instead of counting sheep, that you have counted your blessings. One of the complaints that you're going to have about people getting well is this: I can't sleep at night. And your answer should be, well, praise the Lord. You're so far behind in counting your blessings until God is waking you up at night so you can catch up. Start counting your blessings, and before you get them all counted, you'll be asleep. No one has ever died from the lack of sleep, but they have died from worrying about it. So what I'm trying to tell you this morning is, let God be God. Learn to obey. Be absolutely obedient. And study the great mysteries that's in this Bible, and the more you study them and let God be God, the more the beautiful, beautiful greatness that God will show to you and open your eyes to the truth that's in the Bible. It's been a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning. I hope I've given you something to take home with you. Many of you have heard this before, but keep thinking upon it. This is only just the seeds of thought. I could talk about it every day in the year and not even cover the subject, but I've only given you the highlights. I've only planted the seed. Now the new look and search for the harvest that is there. And where there is no night, it's all day, all the time. And in the New Jerusalem, in the earth made new, it says, there shall be no more night, there shall be no more darkness, there shall be no more shadows. But remember this, when Adam failed, when Adam sinned, his whole kingdom fell with him. And as the husband makes mistakes as the head of the family, his whole family falls. Upon you husbands, upon you men, lies the greatest responsibility. And any man that blames his wife for anything gets what he deserves, a good chewing out. So the thing about it is, take the responsibility upon your shoulders. Lead your family in the paths of righteousness' sake. And when your children, when they're little, or your grandchildren, teach your children never to say to those children, don't be a tattletale. Teach those children to be a tattletale, because their problems then are as great as the Watergate affair was. You listen to those children and restore that child's feelings and rights in his own eyes. And if you'll do this from the time he is born until he is 7 years old, you have sowed that child to you for life. And parents say to me time and again and again and again, what have I done to lose my child? What have I done? There's a gap. There's a generation gap. And it was done with those words, don't be a tattletale. Teach them to be tattletales so you'll know what they're doing. Teach them that they can count on you to